Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode today. Just like always, hopefully you enjoyed the holiday break last week where we didn't have any recorded episodes except for the IQ supplement. So we're going to jump right into the topics today. And we've got a lot of questions about Elon's third party. We've got a question about it from LK Rurik. Tex, Nitro, and Stealth Bomber. There's a few specific questions also that are deal with this, which we'll jump into from Pay-Per-View and Maverick and a few others. So we'll jump right into my thoughts on the third party, whether it will actually last to November 2026 with the midterms, how serious he is about this, what support base can we expect, and should Elon be deported over this matter. The thing is, I think everyone understands this, but this is incredibly stupid. It's just stupid. Like, there's no other way to say this. But this is showing how much of a political idiot Elon is. And it's really confirming all of my jokes and all of my criticisms of Elon that he's doing this. And the third party, we joked. This wasn't even partially joking, but, there were a lot of jokes done when he first suggesting this over a month ago with his first disagreement with Trump over the big, beautiful bill and not getting the NASA administrator he wanted. And he's like, I'm going to form a third party and 80% of Twitter's with me. And we're going to represent the interests of the 80%. And at that time, I'm like, you cannot build a party on Indians, foreign content farmers, and porn bots, and this is the only support base for it. And now we're seeing this is that none of the people actually supporting this party can't even vote in American elections. Ian Miles Chong has never been to the United States. He lives in Malaysia. Mario Nafal lives in Australia, not an American citizen. The Doge designer guy lives in India. Pretty much everyone else lives in India. There is no single American involved in this party except for Elon, and Elon himself is an immigrant. There is no one who has been born in the United States, and they had that paperwork that was filed. People, Elon's claiming it was bogus, but the party treasurer organizer is an Indian who works at Tesla. So there is no single American involved in this. And they're not getting any prominent Americans in it. I think it's just like Mark Cuban expressed some interest. But Mark Cuban is a Democrat. Mark Cuban only has interest in this in hurting Republicans. He is not actually going to join this thing, especially when they can't get any real life people to join it. Everything is done by AI slop. Even, Elon's ideas are being generated by Grok. He is asking Grok for ideas, and he's like, great idea. And pretty much all of the art and propaganda being produced for this is being done by Indians through Grok. It's the first political movement entirely designed by AI and foreigners. So it's a complete joke. But I think Elon is now more committed to this. Because a lot of times Elon suggests ideas and then he moves on from them. But then when he brings it up a second time, that shows a level of seriousness that he didn't have before. And it's even when he was suggesting buying Twitter back in 2022. At first it was just like him making rumblings and it looked like he would back out. But then he brought it up a second time. And then he was fully committed to it and he actually did it. Here, he is putting a lot of his reputation on stake at it. As is. And, he tried to reconcile with Trump. He issued that apology. But, this is the second time he's turned on Trump. And he feels embarrassed that, he put all his, he wanted to show he matters in politics and he had no effect on the big, beautiful bill. It does show how little influence he has over actual Americans because, a month ago when he was first turning against the big, beautiful bill, he was calling on all of his followers and getting these content farmers to demand that they call Congress and blow up the Capitol Hill lines. And congressmen reported that there was no increase in phone calls. And they can only find like one congressman who reported that someone said kill the bill, like Elon was doing with his shitty kill bill memes that he's putting out. So there's no actual American support for this, for a third party, particularly one from an Elon. Now, to go into this, we have to explain about why third parties don't work in the United States. They just don't. Everyone always has these ideas that we need a third party to be specifically dedicated to our specific ideology. This has always been a common idea on the right where, they're like, we need a true libertarian party, or we need what Americans really want is a white nationalist party or something of that sort, which these parties all fail. I mean, probably the biggest failures are the white nationalist parties, which never run any candidates, just get the few followers they have doxxed, and they eventually crumble and fall apart, and then no one learns any lessons from them. They've always failed. And they don't even they get maybe a few hundred supporters. They think this is going to destroy the GOP, and it never works. The third parties never work on that degree. Now, you do have the Libertarian Party, which is probably our longest lasting third party. But all it does, its only political effect is acting as spoiler against Republicans. And it, as an organization, is full of clowns and kooks. The only reason why it continues to exist is that it has a degree of money and institutions to pay people to be a part of it. Like, taking control of the Libertarian Party actually matters because you have salaries to give out. There is a degree of influence that you have by being a part of the Libertarian Party, which for most third parties, there's nothing there. But there you could be, I'm, chief organizer for the Libertarian Party. That's a job. You can go out and find some candidates to act as spoilers for against Republican candidates. And so there's something there to take over. And that's really all that exists, is that there is enough patronage within the party to justify its existence, and that people do want to run as its candidates, particularly in the presidential race. But otherwise, it is just filled with kooks. And that's what most third parties are, is that even if you go to the most successful third party in recent history, the Reform Party was a very goofy organization. When Pat Buchanan ran as its candidate in 2000, his chief opponents were these transcendental meditation types. They're into like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Eastern mysticism, and all these guys were like doing these like joint meditation efforts, or against Pat Buchanan taking over the party. And then the Ross Perot people, who were not that thrilled with Pat Buchanan taking over the party because they felt he was too conservative, backed the transcendental meditation people. And, that split the party when Buchanan took over. And outside of that, there was all these other types of kooks. I mean, there was goofy libertarians. All these people thought like, the Freemasons controlled the country. I mean, some people might think that now, but, it's not really people that normal Americans want to associate with. And with the Reform Party, there was at least a more popular basis for that support. And then within the 90s. One, Ross Perot people took him more seriously than they do Elon now. Elon is more of a joke to people. Some people still admire him as a businessman, but his public reputation has taken a nosedive. Some of it is because he's taken risks to be right-wing. His Trump support, his taking over X, and his elevating of certain right-wing views, that's diminished a lot of his popularity. But it's also the understanding that he's like a crazy guy. He's got all these baby mamas running around demanding child support. He's got an alleged drug problem. He has a lot of weird behavior. He shows up to the White House in a stupid hat and a Doge Father t-shirt with a suit coat over it. He looks, that people just don't have that level of respect for him that they had for Ross Perot. Ross Perot was considered a serious businessman who could make things right in the government and run the American government like a business. And he also had an issue to campaign on and trade, which there's a lot of concern over trade and, the free trade agreements and these global multilateral trade agreements that America was making, like NAFTA and elsewhere, in the 90s. And so he had an issue to campaign on to say, I oppose. And there was this general discontent with the two-party system that he could always build into. But at the end, he never really built a stable party because the only people he could attract to it to leave the two parties were clowns. Now, Reform Party did win a governorship with Jesse Ventura, but Jesse Ventura, didn't really have much of a campaign message. It's just various conspiratorial stuff. So sometimes he would be more libertarian, sometimes he'd be more leftist. He was all over the place, but it never really worked. And then the type of people he was attracting was this transcendental meditation people who wanted like transcendental meditation to take over the country. These aren't serious people. But this, was able to attract some degree of support due to Ross Perot blowing a lot of his money on advertising and creating this reputation as being a no-nonsense businessman who could solve our problems. And there was enough people to sign up for that, and also with the trade issue to sign up for that. With Elon, there's not even a central political figure he has to have as his central guy. Massie does not have a lot of charisma. Massie strikes people, and I like a lot of what he does on foreign policy, and it's also admirable that he sticks to his principles, but he comes off as a nerd with a chip on his shoulder. He is very much like the Screech type that Elon Musk highlights as that we need more people of. He is not a guy that people see him as like the Chad alpha that they want to follow into battle. He is very nerdy. And he is he's very disagreeable and contrarian. And that's not really a central figure you want to rally behind. And also Massie probably doesn't want to be go full America Party, because then if he really embraces the America Party, Republicans, Trump is going against Massie, but there's still some Republican support for him. But if he just decides to go full America Party, he loses that Republican support that he has and makes it more likely he's going to lose his primary. Now, Musk would raise a lot of money for him. I know Musk has a strategy that they're going to focus on like 8 to 10 House races and 2 to 3 Senate races or whatever, and then they're going to make a stand. The problem is, what fucking candidates are they going to recruit? They have one in Massie. But Massie might be hesitant about going full American Party. Now, if they allow him just to stay a Republican and then Elon's just dumping millions into his race, that might ensure he keeps his seat. But who else are they going to get? Like, everyone they have is a foreign influencer. You cannot run Elon Strong. Also, Elon is a moron. Elon cannot vouch for political people, and the people he has around him are all foreign Indians. So who the hell are they going to run in these races? They're literally going to find like an AI bot to run for the Senate. And you think this is a joke, but they're absolutely going to do this. Everyone they're going to find is going to be a complete clown who is not going to have any degree of support. They're not going to find serious candidates to run. Now, Elon has a lot of money to blow on this, even more money than Ross Perot did. And he has a lot of public stature, but he is not going to attract any real American citizens to run. So, I don't, because he's going to want them to be the full Elon candidate. So they're going to run have crappy Elon Reddit tier jokes. They're going to be relying on these Indian crafted AI images and a Grok derived platform. They're just not, and their whole thing is about the debt, which is like, when you're running on a third party, there has to be a popular issue that you feel the parties are not addressing. Now, you could say it is the debt, but really, not that many Americans care about the debt. They're like, oh, this is a problem, but it's some faraway problem. They're not that highly motivated by it. A lot of third parties were built on a single issue that the two parties were not addressing, like slavery. There's various abolitionist parties. The Free Soil Party was pretty popular. And then that became the basis for the Republican Party when the Whigs collapsed. And that was the only time that there was a successful third party, is when the other second party collapsed in the 1850s over slavery and immigration issue, and then that formed the Know Nothings and the Republicans, with the Republicans surviving as becoming the new second party and the two-party system. But outside of that, there has not been a long-lasting third party. They either got absorbed by another party like the Populist Party in the 1890s, which with William Jennings Bryan, they all moved into the Democrats. The Bull Moose Party, progressives, most of them moved back into the Republicans when Teddy Roosevelt went back and returned to the Republicans. The American Independence Party, which was Wallace's thing, it was too built up around this one person. That's another problem with these third parties, is they're all built up around one personality, and then that guy either returns to the standard two-party alignment, like Wallace, like Teddy Roosevelt, like a lot of the Populist Party leaders, or they become more irrelevant and leave politics like Ross Perot, which then witnessed the collapse of the Reform Party. And Elon Musk isn't even running for office. He's going to have to recruit people, and the only guy he's got is Massie, who is not enough to build up a third party around. No, he does not have the charisma of a Wallace or a Teddy Roosevelt. And he doesn't even have the name recognition of one of those guys. So it's not going to be, Massie as the guy. It's all Elon. It's become a personality cult around Elon, but Elon isn't the one running for office. So it's just the one funding all this, and it's just not going to work. But if there was a collapse of the two parties, like one of the two parties was collapsing, and that they had a lot of candidates, a lot of their lawmakers were refusing to back the party agenda, and they decided to form another party, that could happen. But there's so much institutions built up with this. There's this whole farm system they have through college Republicans, college Democrats that recruits young people through that. There's all these donor networks that are tied to the parties. There is the patronage networks that they derive from having power in towns and states and the federal government. There's nothing that a third party has. If you're joining a third party, you're refusing all those institutions that are built around the two parties, and then you're just hoping that AI memes generated by Indians is enough to win, presidential election or something. So I don't know how serious this is. I mean, you do wonder whether Elon will give up on this idea of just how ridiculous it is. I mean, he wants to do, an America Party convention this summer in Austin, apparently, which he got from Grok, best of all. He got from Grok. And he thinks that, there'll be something there. But, that convention would be such a clown show. I actually support this third party because it's going to further diminish Elon's reputation on the right, and that fewer people are going to be spending all their time on Twitter, riding him, worshiping him and acting like he's a god. I think that they're going to see how stupid this is. And there's going to be such hilarious content from a convention where it's going to be entirely Indian. There's going to be no white people there. It's going to be just total clown show of who he gets to speak. And no one is going to be inspired by it. So I support it for the content reasons and for furthering along my critiques of Elon and making more people aware of my critiques of Elon. And also showing that it's like he's like a political idiot, and it's probably better if the GOP moves on from him. And that is the case. Like, some people were like, we want this to return. Like, base Mike Lee shared that horrible meme video of Elon and Trump dancing together, which was so bad. I remember there was one where they put Peanut the Squirrel in it with like RFK and I think Tulsi Gabbard. Those videos are so bad. And like, we want this vibe back. And like, no one wants that vibe back. No one wants the terrible memes back. No one wants that stuff back. And, and part of that is that we have to build up a personality cult around Elon for him to stay in and to care about his pet issues, which is the debt no one cares about, EV subsidies, which no one cares about, and getting, his people as NASA administrator. No one cares about that either. So what is the agenda here? There's not even really an agenda for the American Party except for we're going to tackle the debt through Indian content farmers demanding we cut benefits for Americans on the behalf of foreigners, and that's that. It's not even a uniting issue for the right. I think if there was like a non-interventionist angle to this, there might be more internet support for it. I don't think there would be that much real life support, but there would be a lot of internet support for that. That could be it can't that would get a lot of internet support, but he's not even going with the issues the internet cares about. A lot of the internet likes Massie because he's critical of Israel. He's the only Republican to do that. Instead, they're focusing on the issue that the internet doesn't give a shit about with Massie with the debt. No one cares about the debt. So, I don't know what Americans are going to go with it. But I support this going along because I think it's be really funny content. I think more people are going to come around to my Elon takes. It would be best if we had the world's wealthiest man on our side. But if part of that deal is that we have to have all of his stupidity and and we have to keep alive his stupid personality cult, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it to have that with Elon. And and it really is just showing how much of a political idiot it is that he thinks the third party is going to be it. Now, he might be smarter and realize that this should just be a pressure group within the Republican Party. That this is like the DSA for Elon fans in the Republican Party. Due to the amount of money Elon has and his control of X and his public reputation, him backing random candidates in primaries could help him. The issue is that Elon's a political moron and he's going to choose absolute clowns to back. And I don't think a lot of these Republican candidates know if they take Elon's support, they're going to draw Trump's ire, and Trump is far more important and far more beloved by Republican voters than Elon is. So they're going to be making a bad bet by getting backed by Elon, because then Trump's going to be like, I'm not backing this person, I'm opposed to this. And Elon wants to send a message to Trump that he matters more than Trump, that the only reason that Trump won was because of him, Elon did play a factor in it, but it's not due to him raising money and doing these stupid ads. Like he had this one where he was implying Kamala as a C word. And he's like, she's a C word. And then it's like, not that word. She's a communist. And it's like total Reddit humor. And then it's like, see you next Tuesday. Wiki face. And then that stuff never convinced any. All this stuff that the America PAC ran, that didn't convince a single voter. It was also these events of dubious legality where they doled out cash. That didn't get any voters. He spent all this money in that Wisconsin Supreme Court case. None of their stuff actually worked on getting voters. What really helped Trump was his taking over X and turning it into a right-wing propaganda vehicle that was very pro-Trump. And then that set a standard for the rest of social media to allow more free speech and to move in a more pro-Trump direction, which definitely helped Trump in the election. But it was more buying X that helped Trump rather than his financial support. And certainly what Elon thinks is that him appearing at his rallies and shit was like the deciding factor. I don't know about that. His rally appearances, which at that time everyone was having to suck him off. So everyone was like, oh, wow, this is so epic of him autistically jumping up and down. And even Trump was like annoyed by this. But that's what it is. There's been some bad takes about people that are like, well, Vivek might run for it. Vivek is cruising to the Republican Party nomination in Ohio. The only guy they have is Jim Tressel, who does not have what it takes to beat Vivek. He is running this like boring, like, I'm going to avoid all red meat and controversial issues and just focus on like how I was a good football coach for Ohio State. That's not like what people want. Vivek is going to get the nomination for Republic, and he's probably going to be the next governor. depending on how the general election runs, and if they get Sherrod Brown. It's going to be a tough race for Vivek, but I think he'll probably win the governorship, unless there's a total like collapse in Republican national support or something. But it's like, why would he join the American Party? Also, him and Elon decided he didn't like Vivek and pushed him out of Doge. Like, Vivek doesn't like Elon, and it's more likely that Vivek is now going to get is going to have more political clout than Elon is in the future. So that's like another. They're like, oh, we could get Vivek. It's like, you're not paying attention if you think that. So yeah, I there's no support for this. This is like one of the dumbest third party initiatives in American history. If you look at the Free Soil Party, there's a lot of support there because they felt the two parties were not adequately defending the principle of free soil, in 1848. Even the anti-Mason Party that was big in the 1830s, that had a lot of support. That was there was a lot of hysteria and paranoia over the Masons. Which the funny thing is when the first election they got involved in was 1832, which was between Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson, which both men were Masons, but Henry Clay appealed more to the anti-Freemason movement. There was that. The populists were, that the two parties are not representing farmer interests correctly, and that they're too beholden to powerful corporate interests. So we're going to get, there was a lot of support there. Bull Moose Party, there was a lot of support for progressives, and a lot of support for Teddy Roosevelt. And then with George Wallace, there was a lot of support for him. And a lot of that energy Republicans tried to take in and move in their direction with George Wallace. And George Wallace was an extremely charismatic, powerful figure. Even if you look into the type of third party that they were having, that Huey Long was trying to get involved in the 30s, but he was assassinated. There's a lot of support for that at the time. And then Reform Party, Perot came at the right moment where there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the two-party system, and there was a lot of concern over free trade, and he was able to build into that. Elon, he is banking on millions of Americans thinking he is awesome and that is the coolest, funniest guy on earth, and that there's going to be an entire third party built around his personality cult, plus reducing the debt. It's like that they tried to build the Free Soil Party post-Civil War when we solved the issue. It's like behind the times. Like, the most concern for the debt was early 2010s, which was a Republican-driven thing, which is a corporate or a billionaire-driven idea, which is all these rich people were really concerned by the debt, and then they were convinced that this is going to become the Republican future, which then Trump showed that this is what really was motivating the Tea Party and the Republican base. It was immigration. Now with Elon, he thinks that this is the issue that that Americans care most about. But it's really not even the debt. It's all about Elon's personality cult and him thinking we're going to be centrists and we're going to be moderates and we're done with the two-party system and we're going to move to the middle. And the middle is Elon Musk personality cult. No one's into that. No one wants to get the Elon personality cult does not have enough support to be the basis of a third party, and he wouldn't even be the candidate. So it's just going to fail, in my opinion. So we're going to go with some of the related questions on this. Maverick asked, should Elon be deported? It would be really funny if he was deported, but we still benefit from some Elon stuff. I mean, SpaceX is doing good work and other things. So it'd be really funny if he was deported. I like Trump suggesting it. I also like Trump suggesting where he turned Doge onto Elon's government contracts and other things. I think that's a pretty funny move, but I don't think he's going to be deported. Let's see. There's a couple of questions about Thomas Massie. Yeah, Nitro and Tex asked about this. I'll just read Nitro's question because it's specific. Do you think Massie will finally be out of Congress with the upcoming midterms? I like a lot of his stances as much as anyone else, but I'm sick of his antics and especially his Twitter fan base. I guess he could end up as the headline H1B America Party candidate. No, if he will not be the headline H1B America Party candidate. I also think if like this thing is going to be such a failure for Elon in the midterms that he's probably going to give up the idea and pretend he never did it. And it won't be around for him to run a third party presidential candidate. Now, if it for some reason is still around and Elon is still committed to this, which I think he'll realize that this is a sinking venture and he should just retire from politics, he would have Massie as his only guy. Now, with Massie finally being out of Congress, he is pointing out he has won decisively his primaries in the past. And that is true. He's faced a lot of primary threats. Probably more than any other Republican who's been around as long as he has. I think he was elected in 2012, and he has faced tough primary battles ever since he got into office. So, he survived all of them. And he won pretty big last time, even though he was having AIPAC running ads against him. But this time, Trump is a factor in the race, which he wasn't in the past. I think there was I don't think Trump backed a candidate against him in 2020. I'll actually double check that. He didn't back one in 2024. That was all AIPAC. So in 2020, Trump did denounce Massie for his opposition to the COVID stimulus bill and other things, which was very unpopular position at the time. But he didn't seem to formally endorse a candidate against him. In 2022, he endorsed Massie. Massie then paid back that by being one of the most aggressive supporters of DeSantis. But they had two guys that no one was really backing. AIPAC really just ran an anti-Massie campaign rather than a pro-other guy campaign. This is going to be different this time because Trump, they're going to spend a lot of time trying to pick someone as the anti-Massie guy. And Trump has a lot of support among voters in these districts. And him being the guy to be Trump saying that this is my guy and I really care about this race and you voters should support him, that's going to hurt Massie. Now, Massie's likely going to have AIPAC backing going against him again. The only thing that might save Massie is Elon's money, which I think that might be the only tangible result of the America Party is that Elon dumps a lot of money into Massie just to spite Trump, and that might be enough to save him. So there's that one thing he has. But I think that's going to be the only tangible thing the American Party does. Every other race that they're going to get involved in is going to be a failure for them, and it's not going to work. But the fact that they keep Massie, if Elon comes in and supports Massie, and Massie keeps his seat, this might convince Elon that he needs to back a presidential candidate in 2028. Now, I could see a possibility that Massie runs for president in 2028 because he really has a chip on his shoulder now, and he really wants to send a message to the rest of the Republican Party and defend his policies and principles. And if Elon Musk says, I'll back your third party candidate, or not even a third party candidacy, but I'll back your primary candidacy in the Republican field, that could happen as well. I think there's a good chance if Massie keeps his seat, he'll run for president. Especially if Elon agrees to support him, which is likely. But Elon changes his mind on a lot of things. Elon might be retired from politics in 2028, or he might be trying to return to the Republican fold by backing, Vance or another candidate. But we'll see what happens with that. Massie, this is the most, I think a lot of people are a little too dismissive of the threat towards Massie because they look at the past and they're like, well, he survived in the past. But Trump, really demonstrated his power over Republican voters when he backed all these people who ran against those who supported his impeachment effort. And pretty much everyone he backed won the races against impeachment voters. He defeated Liz Cheney and a lot of other people who seemed to have a lot of power and clout. And this time, his only focus is defeating Massie. And if he really champions a candidate, that could be the end of Massie's political career. So we'll see. But even if Massie loses, I could still see him running for president, either as a libertarian or, I don't know, maybe Elon tries to run for a third, actually tries to do the third party thing. So there's that. Pay-per-view has related questions about it. He says, with Elon pushing himself further away from Trump, can we see meaningful progress on the H-1B visas? The fact that Trump recently made a post referencing remigration should indicate him mentioning H-1Bs is quite plausible. Yeah, I think even with Trump's bad messaging on immigration, it's just dealing with farm workers and hotel workers. It is not with H-1Bs. And once he has a grievance against someone, and the fact that Elon and a lot of Elon allies were the ones pushing for H-1Bs, he could take a tougher line on it. Now, the administration's already taking a strict line on H-1Bs and restricting access to them and the rules of gaining them. A lot of people have been saying he's been increasing H-1Bs. No, the administration's been placing rules that makes it a bit tougher to gain an H-1B visa. And they could further this crackdown as a way to hurt Elon. I think it is possible that he goes fully against H-1Bs because the lobbying interest for H-1Bs is tech world and was primarily Elon. And those guys are losing a lot of their clout with Trump by association with Elon. So, there's a few other tech guys who have it, but I think with Zuckerberg and some of these other guys that are really narrowly concerned about their specific business interests and that type of stuff, and not as concerned with broader issues like H-1B. And the main guy in his ear telling about H-1Bs was Elon. Not on good terms with Elon, and the people most attacking Elon now in his circle are very anti-H-1B. So I could see him turning against that issue. Absolutely. I think that's a very realistic possibility. So, yeah, I think that's all the questions I have with Massie and Co. and Massie and Elon. So I will go on to other questions from everyone else who's got questions today. I'll just go with the second questions from pay-per-view and a few others that we have. So pay-per-view had a question. Last week, a New York Fire Department precinct got in trouble for giving a group of random hot girls a joyride in their fire truck. Is the person likely implementing no bro culture or fun at work policy? An older, envious male. Why did he send four? Or never mind. We'll just ask the second one. The other ones are for the mailbag. Anyway, he's talking about an older, envious male having a generation conflict between Generation X and Zoomers. Are the stereotypical awful that climb the New York Fire Department ladder that Con Inc. loves to blame? I haven't really looked into this, but if I had to guess, it's a stereotypical awful because most of the efforts against these bro culture among police and fire departments, especially in New York, has been from women. And I remember even Letitia James, has been trying to go against the fire departments and they booed her and other things. So it's most likely an awful. I don't think it's an older, envious male. It's primarily driven by awfuls. If it is, even if the person going up against it is a male, it has to be women involved in this because women are the only ones who are going to get mad about this. It's not going to be a straight male who's like, it's just the boys being boys. It's going to be women who are pissed off about this. So it's obviously a stereotypical awfuls going up who is influencing this decision, or stereotypical awfuls working within the bureaucracy. I would have to blame that for it. but it's not an issue that I have looked deeply into. I did see about it. I did see the New York Post reports about it. We'll go to K Max. Will save LK Rourke's question for the end. K Max has. Once again, he's adding adonyms. I told him not to do any more adonyms, but he's what? What the? Oh yeah, he's talking about Nathan Kaufness. Argues the following: there are two ways to stop woke institutions. First, shut down all institutions. No more universities, scientific research, museums, orchestra. He says this is the MAGA strategy. Second, fight and win the battle of ideas. Wokeism stands or falls by the equality thesis. In your view, is there a middle ground to this? The equality thesis of elite liberals seems like, okay, he's got an essay. The bell curve has been out for 30 years, and all the evidence of failed African society never changed woke liberal minds. Your view? I don't think that there. I guess there is a middle ground. I don't even think MAGA is shutting down all institutions. They're not. We still have universities. There's still a degree of scientific research and museums and orchestras. The thing is, they're just donating less to the scientific research, which I think is rather stupid. But the reason why they're doing this is because it's the only things you can easily cut through the executive branch. And it's primarily a result of Doge, because Doge could not cut entitlements. And, they did cut a lot of DEI programs and other things, which are good. But the only thing that they could really just cut like that is scientific research that we need. That is why America is the powerhouse it is because we're financing all this research to build up new technology and advance things and, do cancer research and other things. But that's the stuff that's easiest to cut. But we're not really destroying all institutions, so I think that's Kaufness going overboard. Winning the battle of ideas, I don't know. Kaufness is really into that, but Americans are naturally egalitarian, and it's very hard for them to believe that we are not all born equal. And to really make natural inequality the basis of our society is very tough for Americans to believe, even for right wingers or like natural right wing or, the average Trump supporter. So, I mean, we're going up against wokeism a lot for as far as the American public will go along with it. And the American public feels that wokeism interferes with the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of commerce. I mean, both are the same thing, really. And they felt it became too onerous for our economy and for Americans' personal pleasures and individual rights and all that. And that's why it's been in retreat or moderated. But it's still going to be around a lot because a lot of elite institutions still believe in it. And people who are being produced by academia and a lot of elite law fields and other things are still strong believers in wokeism. And in the battle of ideas, I think the Kaufness, I don't really have a problem with it, but the Kaufness, firm, we're going to make people believe in race and IQ differences, this is going to be the matter of concern for them. So I don't know. Well, he also asked a question about Elon's America Party, which I already covered in our first segment. We're not going to have many members of Congress join it. Massie will only join it if he loses his seat. But I think if he loses his seat, the American Party is going to shudder after the midterms because that's going to be the only chance that they have for any type of success in the midterms. And if he loses his seat, then it's pretty much over. It'll just be a joke. So I already answered that. He has. I'll just answer his other mailbag questions because they're quick. He has one that's very quick where he asked for a book suggestion on Nelson Mandela. I don't have a book suggestion on Nelson Mandela yet. We'll have a good book suggestion on him when I do my IQ supplement for him in February. But his other question is, Almost every academic in the humanities and social sciences went from believing in the sex binary to the existence of transgenderism in the space of about 10 years. Has any social movement away from the consensus ever taken hold so quickly? Professors literally got fired for saying they believe in biological sex after thousands of years of this being the normal view. How did this happen so fast? Well, it's more that just, as I was saying, wokeness took hold of the academia very quickly. I don't think it was so much over 10 years, but it became very clear over 10 years that this was the new norm. And, the academia was highly impacted by the George Floyd revolution. And that's one of the areas where that impact is still recognizable. Because the only academics being hired in history are those working on African American or ethnic studies or women's history. So you pretty much, if you're a white male, even if you're a gay white male, you can't be hired. And if you're a white male, you're just not going to get hired at all. You have to be a minority. It's even tough for a white female, but there's still a possibility you can get hired. But pretty much everyone else is a minority. And they're working on minority interest topics. And that's the case for the humanities across the board. And that impact also happened on medical field, where all these medical schools got taken over by wokeness, and they're like, you can't even see race anymore. You can't even see gender anymore. So it was really just an impact of how wokeness really took over academia, and it's still set in stone within academia. And the fact that Kaufman works in academia makes him feel that this is still an ever-present, oppression, because it still dominates that institution. And so has anything really taken hold so quickly? Not quite that quickly. No. Even on race issues, if you look at the civil rights movement and stuff and integration, 30 years after the Civil Rights Act passed, there was still a majority of Americans who disapproved of interracial marriage. Now, fast forward 30 years after that, 96% of or 95% of Americans support interracial marriage. So things change quickly. I think it's the fact that internet, now more Americans live online, that ideas have quicker transference to people's beliefs. Is that in the past, it took a long time for people to change their views. But now with the internet, people could just change like that. The real change in consensus was on gay marriage, where in 2008, both candidates ran on opposing gay marriage. 7 years later, gay marriage is less than 7 years later, because it happened in the summer of 2015. Less than 7 years later, gay marriage is legal throughout the land. And even in the November of 2008 election, California voted to ban gay marriage. So, the bluest state in the country voted for us, or voted against it. So that changed quickly in 10 years. And I think it's how our media and communications world makes a quicker impact on people's views, and people's ideas on things can just change overnight. And you can even see that with Black Lives Matter, where, it went from, controversial movement to where people didn't, was like, oh, that's too much. And there's a lot of criticism of it, to overnight, 2/3 of the country supports it. Now, in just a few years after that, the majority of the country has a negative view of Black Lives Matter. Or it depends on what you look on the polls, but it's significantly declined since 2020. So due to the internet, people are more willing to, or not more willing, but it's more possible for people to quickly change their views and attitudes than it was in the pre-internet age. Views, attitudes, and prejudices were more set in stone 40, 50 years ago than they are today. And so that's how you can see a quick shift like that. And especially in a field which is academia, where these left-wing crazies control it, they'll push people along because that's how they have to keep their job. So that is my answers to that. We'll go for Gillis Enjoyer. We'll ask his 2 questions. He says, do you think the next step in fixing our immigration law our immigration issues is rewriting the asylum laws. Obviously, having a secure border is important, but if people still manage to get in, and then they have the ability to stay, assuming they claim asylum and get a sympathetic judge. Is it possible to actually stop this from happening by changing these laws, and how can we go about it? Well, Trump's already doing that by making it harder to gain asylum here. And, they're stripping several, hundreds of thousands of people are trying to of that asylum. And so many illegal immigrants were able to come here on claiming dubious asylum, protections. But now the Trump administration is like, no, you no longer get that, and we're going to deport you if we find you. So you can already do this through the executive branch. Of a lot of the how asylum laws are interpreted is up to the executive branch. This is once again a matter of the executive branch facing off against the judicial branch. Because what we're having is Trump is trying to tighten asylum laws and restrict the ability of illegal migrants to claim asylum, and it's being battled out in court. But here, the executive branch is already trying to do that. I'll point out some specific examples of how the executive branch is already tackling this issue. So just last week, Trump has been trying to deny asylum access to people coming in from the border, because this is what happened to Biden. All these people are like, "Oi, I have asylum because my house sucks in Guatemala or something." This is what the real reasons they would claim. They're like, "Oh, it's there's too much crime." I guess people from Baltimore can now claim asylum in America or something, and they would have these dubious reasons for claiming asylum, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, well, you can stay in this country, and you have a court date in 2027." So they get to stay here for years before the court date. Now, Trump administration is saying you are denied access to the country if you try to apply for asylum at the border. Judges have been going back and forth. The Supreme Court says he has the ability to do this, but courts are still fighting him over this, and liberal judges are still saying he doesn't have the power to do this. So there's a fight over that. But the fact is the executive branch can't deny the ability to gain asylum just like that. So it's very easy for the executive branch to do important matters on this, or do important work on this. So I don't think it's I think it's a very solvable thing. I think this is definitely one of the issues that Trump should address, and he is addressing it. And it's one of the things that the executive branch can make a huge impact on immigration by restricting asylum access. He can also restrict refugee access, which the only refugees we're taking in are white. So this is awesome how we're doing that. And that makes a big impact on immigration. Under the Democrats, under both Obama and Biden, they were trying to get 100,000 refugees per year. And under Biden, I think they were getting it because there were so many immigrants coming in. They're like, well, we'll give some refugee status. Now under Trump, they're like, you're not getting this access to our country, and that limits legal immigration. So, because it's counted as legal immigration under some metrics. So, yeah, it's important. So I think Trump, thankfully, Trump's already addressing this matter substantially in his administration. You're never going to get anything passed on asylum laws with Congress. It's just something the executive branch could do, and the executive branch is already doing. Second question is, reform is actually leading the polls in the UK now, but is this really a white pill given how much they're cucking? Rupert Lowe was kicked out of the party for supporting mass deportations, which is basically a normie Republican position in America now. What even is their platform if they won't support deportations? I think they do cuck a bit too much, but they have no other option in the UK. The Homeland Party, which I guess is now the more right-wing alternative, even half the right-wingers in Britain are like, the Homeland Party is cucking because they're not supporting Hitler or something. I see these criticisms. Generally, and they're having mass defections and the Homeland Party, and they're all turning on each other. And they generally, a very internet-based third party is never going to work because they're always going to be at each other's throats. They're always going to be arguing over these very niche issues that only internet people care about. So reform, they're better than the Tories. I don't want to go full pro reform, but I don't need to because I'm not British, so it's not my problem. But if you're British, that really is, if you're going to the ballot, that's the only party you have to choose from. The Tories are still worse. You want reform to be better. Rupert Lowe, I think, him getting kicked out was a problem. I think it was more of a personality conflict between him and Nigel Farage. This is a lot of these things that happen, and then they try to make it ideological. Nigel Farage is cucking too much. So that's why I don't want to think that we want to defend reform a lot, but reform is still the best option they have. Homeland Party is not going to be a serious party, even if they might be ideologically better, but they're already like, people are like, they're not as ideologically good enough. And I know there's a battle between them, and I think Britain First is the other third, or well, I mean, it's like there's multiple parties, but the other right-wing nationalist party, and they're each battling each other to be the alternative to reform, and they don't really have much of a support base and other things. So it is a white pill because it shows that Britons want a solution to immigration, and they're turning to the party that seems to be most primed to do that. But there's also qualifications for it because there is too much cucking from the Reform Party and from Nigel Farage, and there's too much insistence on policing the party rather than being set on their message. So that's that. But I think Republicans are probably a lot better than the Reform Party, which makes it even dumber for Elon's new third party, which is just all about the debt and deficit, which is which only Republicans care about, and it'll just ensure even if it was successful, it just ensure Democrats won elections. But the UK, you don't really have any other option besides reform. There's a lot of other better parties throughout Europe. National Rally is much better. Alternative for Deutschland is the best party in Europe, in my opinion. That's a serious party. AfD is the real deal, but not everyone can be AfD. And you have Reform, which is the best option. And if you're wanting to make a statement that, like, saying we want immigration to be taken seriously, you got to vote for Reform. And the fact that Reform did well in those local elections that just happened like a month or 2 months ago, it made Labor try to take an immigration restrictionist stance. So if Reform does really well in elections, that's going to force the two major parties to do something about immigration. So it's a useful protest vote. I think it's still a white pill, even though Reform Party isn't that great. That's my opinion on it. But what other option do they have? The other more right-wing nationalist parties aren't doing very well in the UK. So that's my answers to that. We've got 2 questions from Arm Day Enjoyer. He says, with so much red pill and manosphere content online, along with jaded Gen X men promoting black pill views, what is your advice for young men today, especially when it's difficult to know a woman's past, as you wouldn't want to be the long-term partner she seeks after being ran through by short-term partners? You really just have to focus on yourself. And despite all the black pills there will be, you have to deal with this shit because you're going to have to get married at some point. The MG Tau, men going their own way, that's not a real solution. So you're going to have, the real issue is that women, you're dealing with a lot more bullshit than your parents and grandparents had to deal with. But you really just have to improve yourself. You have to focus on getting money. You have to focus on, working out, looking good, presenting a positive, optimistic attitude, and you'll probably eventually find something tolerable. I guess it's not the real thing of tolerable is maybe not the best way to sell it, but you need to have realistic expectations of what type of girl you're going to end up with. A lot of women are probably going to have a past. Now, how bad that past is up for debate. If she's got like 100 bodies, you probably need to run away from that. But, I'm not there to assess on how many, her pass or whatever, but there are some standards you need to have, but you're probably going to understand that she's not going to be, a perfect virgin maiden by the time you started dating her, especially depending on your age. But you really just have to focus on yourself and have some standards. It's more about just like how crazy she is, whether she's just gonna like berate you and try to control everything about you. That I think is most important, is that you need to stand up for yourself and not allow this woman to run your life. You need to assert yourself. And I think if you present yourself as a high value guy who's got a lot of things going on, you'll have a greater power in the relationship. So that's the only advice I have. Second question: why is it that the rest of the Anglo countries emphasize human rights, but U.S. emphasizes individual rights? Steve Saylor said that American conservatism is Scots-Irish influence. Perhaps the rest of the Anglosphere lacks Scots-Irish belligerence. I mean, Scots-Irish settled in all the Anglosphere. So that's not really the case. It's more of our unique development is that, one, we separated from the Anglosphere very early on. We also separated when we had, a very violent frontier that we were having to deal with. And a lot of the reason we separated is that the British weren't dealing with the Indians, and we wanted to deal with the Indians and take their land. And we separated so we could have more power to do so. And also as a matter of individual rights, is that we hadn't had a lot of these 19th century, early 20th century ideas influence the founding, obviously, and that we had more 18th century concerns influence our Constitution. And that became the basis for our country. So we were, in a lot of ways, became less cut. But a lot of it was that the British Empire, after we separated, went on a different model that emphasized fairness and some of these human rights concerns, while in the first British model, they didn't really care. And it was more about individual. And really our reason for revolting was that the British were restricting our rights as Englishmen, and so we fought for that. I don't know if it's so much Scotch-Irish influence, but it's a lot of frontier influence. Is that we had a much more violent frontier than the other Anglosphere countries. If you compare, there is this book, a pretty good book I read by David Hackett Fisher about comparing New Zealand to America, and it's about fairness and freedom, where in America we emphasize freedom while the New Zealanders emphasize fairness. And their interactions with the natives was a lot different than ours. And also they've incorporated a lot of the native culture and way of looking at things into their own country. And, they really love the Maori in a way that we don't really, even though we have a lot of Indian stuff, we don't honor the Indians in the same way that they incorporate the Maori into their national identity. And they had a more cooperative attitude towards it, but they were able to do that because the British Empire was a lot more, able to send out troops more readily to deal with the natives, more so than they were in early colonial America, where a lot of it was up to the militias to deal with them. It's like King Philip's War was pretty much fought entirely by the militias. So were most of the other conflicts. The British troops weren't there, while the British troops were more capable of maintaining order, so it allowed for a more cooperative attitude, and they had a less, violent, hostile frontier to deal with. This is the same in Australia, same in Canada. And while America, we had, survival of the fittest, and only a strong survive attitude with individual rights, and also a faraway national government that we always were suspicious of that might restrict our rights and wasn't bringing us as many benefits as, say, the government and forces of order we're bringing in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So I guess you could say it's Scots-Irish influence, but it's more just frontier influence, in my opinion, of how we settled the country and other things. That was very much a greater emphasis on individualism. And it was really seen that it was more the work of individuals in settling the frontier rather than the empire or, government itself. Even though a lot of ways the government was settling the frontier, because when America was established, we pretty much used the army entirely to deal with Indians. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, frontier influence is the way I would rather say it than Scots-Irish influence. They had the Scots-Irish and those immigrant groups in the other Anglosphere as well. So, but that could be a great topic for an IQ supplement. So let's see who else we got. We got a question from New England Refugee. He says, I've seen... well, actually, he's got two questions. He had one about the big, beautiful bill. He said, how much credit do you give Mike Johnson for being amiable enough to cobble together the votes needed to pass the big, beautiful bill? I know Trump is the main factor, but people not hating Johnson like they did McCarthy is also a big one. I guess that's true. There's not as much hostility to Mike Johnson as there is with Kevin McCarthy. He is a much weaker leader, but he's also less hateable. And he was able to cobble this together, and he has a better relationship with conservatives than Kevin McCarthy did. But it's primarily Trump. They fear Trump. All Republicans do in a way that they never did in his first term, and they did not do between 2023 and 2024. They fear Trump. They also know that this is entirely Trump's party, and they don't want to run afoul of Trump. Mike Johnson does deserve credit for being a loyal foot soldier to Trump and cobbling together the votes, but it's mainly Trump is the main factor. But Johnson does deserve credit for this. I don't think McCarthy could have ever done this, but maybe with Trump he could have. There are way more Republicans who have a bone to pick with McCarthy than they did with Johnson, and they would have just voted against this despite McCarthy. Well, they don't really have the motivation to do that against Johnson. And the last thing on earth they want to do is spite Trump. Only really Massie and Rand Paul really want to do that. And also Tom Tillis, who's retiring. But everyone else is just... And that was the Senate, of course, with Rand Paul and Tom Tillis. But everyone else fears Trump. And so Trump is the main factor here. But you can give Johnson credit for being a loyal foot soldier to Trump. His second question is, I've seen 4 liberal families leave the country to go to Europe since Trump won. They're either really brainwashed or homosexual, but all are white. Is this a good or bad thing that white liberals are fleeing America, or is it not really happening in big enough numbers to matter? I don't think it's really happening in big enough numbers to matter. There's a lot more white-collar expats. I don't think that's quite all liberals. I think that's for rather apolitical reasons that they're moving. But they're not moving in sufficiently large numbers to really matter. I think it's just more funny. If they want to leave to Canada or elsewhere or to Europe, see ya, sayonara. We're not going to miss you. I think it's more funny than anything else, but they're not big enough numbers to matter. So, is it a good or a bad thing? It's probably mostly a good thing. We're not losing anything. So, it's just something to laugh about and good content. And if Trump has this effect, then that's pretty funny. I would say we should support it. The next question comes from Dollar Bill. Dollar Bill asks, what possibility do you think is more likely? Trump is a John the Baptist figure preparing the way for someone even greater than himself, or the GOP relapses into its bad habits after he departs the stage? I don't know if it's someone greater than himself, but it's more that the GOP is permanently Trumpified. They can't revert to their bad self after he departs from the stage. As long as Trump is alive, he's going to have influence over the party. And the 2028 primary, unless there's like a massive collapse in Republican support, like there's a huge recession or something just really bad happens that plummets Trump support, most likely the 2028 primary is going to be a battle over who is most pro-Trump. And it's probably going to be the way, if even Republicans lose in 2028, 2032 primary is going to be everyone competing for who's most Trump. Trump is now the Ronald Reagan figure, where everyone wants to associate themselves with him. And, you know, over 10 years after Ronald Reagan had died and had been out of office for 25 years, for nearly 30 years actually. In 2016, all these candidates were competing for who's the most Reagan-esque. The one guy who didn't do that was Trump. But in previous primaries in 2012 and 2008, they were all competing for who's the most Reagan-esque. And Reagan had that power. And I think it's going to be even more immediate. There wasn't so much the carrying on the Reagan torch in 88 and 96. But there's going to be that for the next few primaries, Republican presidential primaries. And the party is permanently Trumpified. So what is more likely? He's preparing the way for someone even greater than himself. The GOP is not going to relapse into its bad habits after he departs the stage. I think that was possible after 2020. It's not possible anymore. He's permanently transformed the party into his image. And we can see that with what happened with the Big Beautiful Bill and how all these Republicans are afraid of Trump and they're all competing for who will be the most pro-Trump. So we'll now end on L.K. Rurik. If for some reason I missed one of your questions, just harass me and I'll get it for the mailbag. L.K. Rurik asks, for a second question, I bought a Doobie Brothers CD because it was the cheapest one at Walmart and I wanted to check if my new car's CD player worked. That's surprising you have a CD player in your car. The only song I liked on it was the first track, China Grove. Thoughts on the Doobie Brothers? I'm not really a Doobie Brothers fan. I never really got into Doobie Brothers. So not a Doobie Brothers fan, but that's awesome. You're still buying CDs. I used to be a big CD collector. I never got into collecting vinyl. I collected CDs when I was when I was in high school and college. But I haven't bought a CD in like 11 years. It's all digital. And I haven't even had a functioning CD player in years. Car doesn't have a CD player. My computers don't even have CD players, so that's impressive if you have a car with a CD player. That's something. I don't even know. I didn't even know new cars had them. But thanks for informing me that. But I'm not a Doobie Brothers fan. Is my concluding thoughts. So that is it for Highly Respected today. We're gonna have more great content this week. It'll be on the normal schedule, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time. Stay respected.